What's up, guys? My name is Micah. So, as you probably know, Apple held an event the other day and they introduced new iPads, which was the theme of the event. Today, we're going to look at what they released and talk a little bit in detail about what they released, as well as I'll show you guys what I ordered and what you can be expecting in the weeks to come. So, to start off, they released iPad Air. So, they actually released two individual iPad Airs. They have a 13-inch now in addition to the 11-inch that was previously there. And if you recall, they actually previously had 10.9-inch, which they now call 11-inch. And if you actually read the fine print, it says 10.86 inches still. So they didn't change the screen size at all, but now claim 11-inch, even though it's not even 10.9-inch. So they just get by with the round up, which rounds up, which rounds up. But I think it's a really great move on Apple to give a larger screen size option of 13-inch, which also isn't a full 13-inch. They just say that as well. But either way, a larger size, close to 13-inch, is very great to have, which it's pretty much the same move that they did last year in March, I believe, with introducing a 15-inch MacBook Air in addition to the 13-inch MacBook Air that was already around. So it's just a great idea to make a baseline thing, have a bigger brother that's not the full Pro, because you don't need to get the best of the best to just get a bigger screen size, because that's a lot of times what people want. Because I've seen people get a 12.9-inch iPad Pro just because they wanted, a larger screen size. They weren't happy with the 11-inch, but they didn't need all the Pro features. But they just got that anyway because they were just wanting a bigger size. And same with MacBooks. People buy a 16-inch MacBook Pro just because that was the only thing that was even close to that size, and they just wanted basically a monitor just with a keyboard, and they didn't want to buy an iMac, so they just buy something bigger. So just having a bigger size for a midline iPad is just a great option. So the other major thing that was updated with the new iPad Air is they now have the M2 chip. So if you recall, they previously had the M1 chip that was released in 2022. So from the M1 to the M2 chip isn't probably going to be a massive upgrade for the iPad, but it will be a nice upgrade if you're coming from specifically like an iPad Air 4 that has the A14 Bionic. You're definitely going to notice some increase in performance there. So lastly, the major other thing that they changed is they moved the front-facing camera to the middle, like where it is on a MacBook, as opposed to on the side, because, that's just a good decision. They did that with the 10-inch or 10.5-inch, I think, iPad 10, and I think people were just happy to see that, so they're going to do that through the whole lineup. So that's pretty much everything new with the iPad Air. Now we'll move to the iPad Pro. So the iPad Pro is actually getting some pretty interesting upgrades. So the first thing is they now have a tandem OLED screen. So what's that going to mean is you're going to get all of the benefits of OLED screen while keeping the brightness that Mini LED provided. The benefits of OLED is basically having true deep and pitch black blacks, while also keeping a very high contrast ratio, which this is actually 2 million to 1 contrast ratio as opposed to the 1 million to 1 contrast ratio of the previous iPads. With the typical LCD panel that has been in the previous, it'll just be like a super dark gray when showing a black screen, while on the OLED, it's going to be like those pixels are off. There's no like surrounding light on them. Those pixels are off, which that was on in the last few generations. Only the 11-inch, the 12.9-inch had mini LED, but there are some things that are nicer about OLED than mini LED, and I'll get into that in a second. So OLED also provides like very, very rich and vivid colors. Mini LED can get very bright, and one of the problems with OLED is that OLED can't get very bright. So OLED is basically what's on pretty much every single phone, and it's been on the iPhones for I don't even know how long, multiple years. They can only get to about 500 to 600 nits, which is decently bright, but that's on a small screen. So if you're having a large screen, you're going to want that extra brightness. So Mini LED provided 1,000 to 1,600 nits, and OLED pretty much maxes out at 600 nits. And if you try to push it, you're going to get what's called burn-in. So burn-in happens when you have just a frozen screen basically on the OLED, and it'll burn in to your screen. So if you have a non-motion frame that just sits on screen for an extended period of time, especially with high brightness, it happens faster, then it's going to burn in and it's just going to be there for a little bit. And that happened to me with, I believe it was an iPhone 6S, and it went away eventually, but it took about a week to go away. So that is hopefully not going to be an issue with this because of the tandem OLED. So tandem OLED basically means instead of just one layer, they have now two layers that are basically stacked on top of each other. So that's going to peak that brightness and also really boost that contrast ratio of having brightest whites to darkest blacks. Is just going to be very, very high contrast between those, which is awesome to see. So with this new tandem OLED, they're going to claim 1,000 nits of full screen brightness with 1,600 nits of peak brightness in HDR content, which is actually the same numbers that were on the 12.9 inch M2 and M1 iPad Pros, the 12.9 inch, and also that's on the MacBooks. So those are the numbers that were claimed with those, and those have been phenomenal. So it would be amazing to see that come to an iPad with OLED on top of that. So it just seems to be a great screen overall. So the other major update with the iPad Pro is they now have the M4 chip. So that's going to have a lot of functionalities around AI, which they mentioned a few more times than once. AI. So the chip has 10 core CPU and 10 core GPU, but what's actually interesting that they don't mention is that's only on the 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte model. If you're going for the 256 or 512 gigabyte option, then it's going to be 9 core CPU. So it'll have 3 performance cores and 6 efficiency cores. Whereas on the full M4 with the 1 or 2 terabyte storage options, it's going to have the 4 performance cores and 6 efficiency cores. So not that that's going to be a major issue for probably anyone, but if you are going to go full out with storage, then you will get an extra CPU performance core. So that's pretty cool for that. So what's interesting is it's kind of hard to compare the M4 with the M3 because this is in an iPad and they're comparing it to other iPads, and there's not been an M3 iPad because in 2023 there were no new iPads released, which is actually the first year since the release of the iPad that there was never an update for the iPad during that year. So, and Apple claimed that this was the biggest event for the iPad since its release.
This is the biggest day for iPad since its introduction.
It's interesting that they're comparing it to the M2 since they really can't compare it to the M3 as far as iPads go. They did compare it a little bit to the M3, but the thing that makes it difficult is that the M4 is only in an iPad right now. They just released this chip in an iPad, and their Apple Silicon chips are pretty much exclusively introduced in MacBooks, and this is introduced in an iPad, so that's a pretty interesting choice on Apple's part. I'll be curious to see when we get the MacBooks that have M4 chip, which I imagine will probably be later this year, but that'll be interesting to keep a lookout on. Then another thing that they introduced with this new iPad is they have a new color. So on the iPad Pro, they're introducing the space black color, which, if you remember, is actually on the M3 Pro and M3 Max MacBook Pros that were released in October of last year, which I actually have my M3 Pro MacBook Pro right here. I have it in space black, and I have loved this color. It doesn't really pick up fingerprints. I mean, it does, but it's very minimal. It's not an issue very much at all. So I've just loved this color, and I think it'll be really cool to have on an iPad. Something they didn't mention that they did do is they also removed the ultra wide camera that was on the back of the iPad Pros. So that's been there since the 2020 A12Z chip iPad Pro. I believe that was the second generation 11-inch or fourth generation 12.9-inch iPad Pros. They like to go in generations. I like to go off of chip because it helps, or year. Either one works. I don't think I'll miss it because I've never really taken pictures with the ultra wide. I've scanned a few documents with the main camera, but never really used the ultra wide, and I don't think I'm going to miss it, and I doubt many other people will. With the camera, one of the cool things that they added was a new AI feature, which is basically going to just dramatically increase the quality of any document scanning that you do. So it'll take a flash, but you know how usually if you have like an overhead light and you're taking a picture with your iPad to scan a document, it's shadowing that light. So now they're going to flash the camera, but it just looks better. They have a demonstration here that I can show you. That's going to be pretty interesting. I don't scan documents too often, but when I do, it's not very fun to do, but hopefully that makes it easier and better, and it'll increase the quality of that. So also on the iPad Pro, they moved the front-facing camera just like they did with the Air. That's awesome to see, which I'm actually really impressed with that because that's where they had all the internals of the magnetic charging for the Apple Pencil. So that's in that same area. So I guess they really packed a lot of technology into just that little small space there. While also, I haven't mentioned this, they also thinned the iPad. So previously the iPads were 5.9 millimeters, and now the 11-inch is 5.3 millimeters, and the 13-inch is now 5.1 millimeters. So that's pretty thin, and they're showing it that it's their thinnest iPad ever because now the iPad is thinner than what the iPod Nano was. So that's pretty interesting that they're showing that off. If any complaints anybody had with an iPad, their complaint wasn't, wow, this feels so thick. Nobody said that. So interesting that they did that. Pretty cool that they did that. I wonder if it's going to have any structural issues like the iPhone 6 had. So I guess we'll just have to see. One of the things that people thought was really interesting was the new Magic Keyboard. So with the new Magic Keyboard, they are basically redesigning the interior of it. So instead of silicone that it was, is now aluminum on just the inside. So hopefully that has less wear and tear, and it's going to probably feel more like a Mac. I'm not sure. I haven't tested it out yet, but that would be really interesting to see. The other major thing that they did with it is they increased the size of the trackpad and also just made it more like a Mac trackpad. So it'll have better haptic feedback, and it should just be higher quality overall. The previous one, it's just so clicky, and I don't know, it's not the best feeling trackpad. The Macs are so much better with the trackpad. So for many people, what was probably the star of the show though for this whole event was the new Apple Pencil Pro. So the Apple Pencil Pro is going to be a game changer for digital artists. It got a complete internal redesign. So basically, while now having the camera up there, they had to move where the magnetic charging is. So I imagine it's more on the side, which if you've ever played around with an Apple Pencil on the side of an iPad, it already is kind of separated like here and here this is a Mac of course, but on an iPad it's about here and here. It's not one magnet. So I'm not sure how much that changed. I imagine what changed is maybe the location of wherever the wireless charging is. I imagine that's what moved inside the pencil. So one of the things that they added with the pencil is toward the tip of the pencil where you have been able to double tap, they now have a squeeze gesture. So what that's going to allow you to do is with the software, it's going to open up a little palette. Instead of having to go to the palette at the top, it's just going to open a little palette right in front of the pencil to choose between your eraser, a marker, a pencil, or just change the color. So that's going to be really neat, and that'll just make it a lot faster. And then another thing that they introduced that's a sensor on toward the tip of the pencil is now have a sensor that detects roll. So that's going to recognize when you're rotating the pencil and adjust your marker in accordance. So that'll be really interesting to see. And then the Pencil Pro also gets a haptic engine, so that'll vibrate to give you assurance of a switched function such as the double tap, I believe. Don't quote me on that. One of the best new things about the pencil, though, in my opinion, is that it's now going to be compatible with Find My. So I've never personally lost an Apple Pencil, but I know plenty of people that have. That really sucks. That's $130. So that's going to be awesome just to have that and have that assurance that if you do lose it or something, if you set your iPad down and then picked it up and then walked away and then 30 minutes later you realize, oh my gosh, I don't have my pencil on me, then that is going to be really nice to just have that on Find My, where you left it. And I don't know though if they have, I'd be curious about how that works with, I don't imagine it's probably as accurate or as good as an AirTag. And also, if say it fell into a cushion in like a couch or something between two couch cushions, does it have a speaker? I don't know. It doesn't. They didn't mention anything about that. I'd be really curious to see how that works. I imagine it's probably just, hey, you're within 5 feet of it, good luck finding it. So hopefully it's not in a pile of, a bunch of junk or whatever that's looks a lot like Apple Pencils. Or maybe you lost it in a pile of second generation Apple Pencils. That would really suck. Anyway, so that'll be really interesting to see. I will definitely do some testing on that. So now that we've gone over pretty much all of the new things that were introduced in the event, I'm going to go over what I ordered from the event. So I ordered the 11-inch Space Black iPad Pro with Wi-Fi and cellular, 256 gigabytes, and also the Apple Pencil Pro to go with it. So all of this should be coming in on May 15th. That's what the order said, and that's what Apple says is the release date, so that's at earliest. So be expecting a review in the following days from then. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and leave a comment if you have any questions about any of the things I went over. And until then, I'll catch you guys in the next one.